Hello, interwebs, and welcome to Jessie Gender After Dark. And today we are doing something extra special because today I have a friend with me, Mr. Philip Hawkins of the wonderful is it Philip Hawkins channel? Is that what you call
Just
it?
Philip Hawkins. Yeah, it's just my name. I should
Yeah,
really think of something a bit more interesting to call it, but no,
I
it's
mean,
just my
I
name.
went with Jessie Gender, and it's just like now I'm stuck with that for forever. I mean, I don't dislike the name, but it's like, oh, I didn't really think that this was a thing that was gonna follow me for years and years. So maybe it's fine to just have it be your name.
Yeah, yeah.
But yes, today we are going to be if I can say words. Today we are going to be doing something kind of fun. We are going to be reviewing Doctor Who Stranded #2. So for those of you who don't know, who are just coming upon this video and are like, what the heck is that? Stranded is an audio drama set with the 8th Doctor in Doctor Who. And Philip and I actually reviewed the first run of this audio drama over on his channel, which I'll link somewhere up above. But the
Yeah,
reason
about a year ago, was it?
yeah, I was back in Los Angeles when we reviewed that. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was like a whole lifetime ago. It feels like that was like middle of the pandemic sort of thing. But yeah, we reviewed it over there, and the reason we did was because not only is it a really cool story, Eighth Doctor's Paul McGann is awesome, but it was the first ever sort of transgender companion for the Doctor, played by Rebecca Root, Tanya. And it's also a different sort of setup for the Doctor in that he's stranded on Earth and actually can't use his TARDIS, kind of harkening back to what was it, like the fourth Doctor? Fifth Doctor
The
days?
third Doctor.
Third Doctor. I see. This is me not knowing my classic Who, where he was stuck on Earth for a time. So this is just him. He has to get an apartment, has to rent a place, all that fun stuff. So since we reviewed the first one, we figured we would review the second one
Why
over
not?
on my channel and just have some fun. So that's me giving the little preamble before we get into it. But Philip, I just want to give you a chance to tell us about yourself for people in my audience who don't know you.
Well, I have a YouTube channel, as we've discussed. Philip Hawkins, just my name. My picture, if you want, because there's more than one Philip Hawkins. It's shocking that somebody
there's only
else.
one in my heart, to be fair.
Thank you. There's a bunch of other Philip Hawkinses that will probably come up if you type into YouTube. But I am the one standing in front of some TARDIS roundels because I do talk about Doctor Who quite a lot on my YouTube channel. It's not the only thing I talk about. I am kind of a mixed pop culture genre channel. I talk about all sorts of things pop culture wise. So
and a fair bit of Star
Doctor
Trek
Who,
for those in my
bit of
audience.
Star Trek.
Yeah,
I've been doing. I did reviews of any episodes when they come out, and then the spattering of odd other Star Trek videos when it's not on the air. I haven't done one for a while actually. I need to do a Star Trek video because I haven't done one since
Lower Decks is coming out soon. So
is it?
Yeah, it
really?
starts up season 2, at least in the US. I don't know whenever if
Is that the
you'll
next
ever get
one?
it.
Is that the next new episodes of Star Trek we've got?
And it's coming out in August, they say. I believe it's August.
I will be reviewing that again then. Yeah. But I also cover the MCU and Red Dwarf, which I've got a weekly Red Dwarf podcast, which Jessie has.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, Jessie has been is on it at some point. I don't know when this is coming out in relation to that, so it may already be out, or this may come out first. But either way, keep an eye on that for an episode featuring Jessie. So yeah,
if it is out, I'll link it up at the top here, so and down below.
Brilliant.
So.
Yeah, so basically anything sort of geeky and pop culture that I like, I talk about, but it is a lot of Doctor Who.
Yeah. As well you should. I mean, come on, Doctor Who is fun. It's great. So, all right. Well, let's get into Stranded. Also, weird thing, they do these like after, at least in my videos or my recordings of it, they do like these behind the scenes things for Stranded after every episode, and they use the same clip of the guy doing like the like saying like I'm the executive producer of Stranded, and he like says it that way every time, and so every time I want to say Stranded, it just got stuck in my head every single time.
Who is that? Is that Nick Briggs? Or
I forget exactly who it was. I know Nicholas Briggs is sort of like the big person for Big Finish, but
the producer was David Richardson and the executive producer Nicholas Briggs. So it could be either of them.
Yeah, it was one of the two of them, but it was just like every single time it's like I'm the same audio clip, executive producer of Stranded, and I'm like, oh my god, I can't stop. Anyways, okay, so I'm just looking at my notes here because I want to remember everything. So the first episode that we're going to talk about is Dead Time, starring by Matt Fitton, and it takes place right after, basically almost right after the end of, not right after, but close to after the end of last season, where the Doctor was sort of being chased by these aliens, and they were the one that sort of trapped him on Earth, and he finally was able to get some power into the TARDIS, finally, after creating a paradox, but also doesn't know why these aliens were sort of worried about him. Sort of, I think it was like something, I forget exactly the specifics. It was like they were thinking he was going to cause a problem in the future.
I think they it kind of presented it like he was, they thought he was going to be the destroyer of their world or something like along
Yeah, I
those
mean,
lines.
as the Doctor tends to be.
Only to the Daleks.
Yeah, well, yeah, he's destroyed a fair few worlds. Let's just say.
Fair enough.
He is not a destroyer of multiple worlds.
Yeah. Usually only if they're bad. Yeah, with good intentions.
Yeah. But yeah, so this episode sort of takes place right after that, with the Doctor having finally gotten some power back in the TARDIS. Is very excited about it because, like, yes, we can actually power her up and go and do some things. But then the crew with Andy, by the way, Andy from Torchwood, or well, he's originally from Andy's originally from Torchwood himself.
He's from the TV series. Yeah.
Yeah.
He is a member of the Torchwood team in that.
Yes,
he only becomes a member of the Torchwood team in the audios, but he's Gwen's friend on the police force in the original TV series of Torchwood.
So we have Andy comes on the TARDIS. It was Robin, who was one of the kids who they are staying with. Robin's mother, whose name I forget off the top of my head. And then you have Liv. Tanya comes as well, Tanya is Liv's girlfriend, right?
Yep.
And also played by Tanya being Rebecca Root, the transgender companion we were talking about earlier. And they basically go on a trip to the future, but then we learn that the TARDIS cannot travel in place, but only in time. So now they're stuck in sort of a desolate post-apocalyptic Earth and trying to figure out how to get enough power to get back to Earth. So that's the basic setup of the episode. So what did you think of it overall?
Oh, I mean, overall, this episode, it was the one I had the least notes about because I don't know. I don't even have any bad notes about it, really. There's nothing that really stood out as particularly bad. But I think it was just because of the nature of it. It was very much an episode where we were sort of catching up on the characters of where they were after the climactic events of the sort of box set finale of Stranded 1. So, and because there were so many characters, we got little pieces with each of them, some of which are very nice little character moments where they pair off into duos. Mm-hmm. But overall, the whole episode itself didn't feel like it was a massively impactful episode for me. There wasn't massively amount that I picked up on that I thought, oh, that I'll comment on that. I'll comment on this, a few little bits here and there, some few nice interactions. And it does, you don't realize it when you're listening to this story, but it does set up some stuff that will be relevant for the fourth story in the box set. So in retrospect, I guess it's a little bit more important. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I don't know. It's a bit of it's probably the one I would, if I had to rank these four, it would probably be on the bottom, but not because it's bad, just because it was just, there wasn't a really strong through line throughout the whole episode, I didn't think.
I'm pretty much in agreement with you. I would also say that it didn't feel like such a strong episode in and of itself. It was mostly just sort of like a small character piece, just to be like, we'll send them into a situation where they have to get out of it, and we'll just use it as a chance for the characters to walk around and talk about stuff with each other for a bit. And the concept is interesting, of the idea that the TARDIS can't move in place, but it can move in time. It sort of like sets this up of like a nice reason to like depower the TARDIS and sort of keep the idea of Stranded. I mean, honestly, I think even that, like, as nice as it is, and you create some interesting stories for this box set overall, I kind of am a little bit saddened that the TARDIS is kind of working to a point now in this point in the series, because I kind of like the whole pitch of Stranded, number one, with him being like really frustrated that he had to be stuck in one place. So I kind of found it to be a little bit like, oh, yeah, okay, we can do some time traveling now. I'm like, it's nice to do it with these characters, but
Yeah, I mean, it is good that he's still kind of rooted to that spot, and therefore still has an anchor to that sort of 2020 Baker Street location. They're still going to be, living in the house and stuff. So it's still got that stranded element. Maybe they could have gone another box set with being completely 100% stranded, because I mean, this whole storyline, this stranded storyline, is meant to last 4 box sets, and I don't know how they would have stretched out being completely stuck in 2020 for 4 box sets. Not sure if that could have lasted that long, but maybe it could have lasted 1 box more.
I agree. I think more. It's just, I think my critique is just like the amount of power, like, because we go basically to the end of time here, or close, like not the end of time, but really far ahead. And it's just like, oh, I would have preferred it that it was still like, oh, maybe it'd only go a few months, or like, because there's still an element of me like, well, he could still go way back in time, put some money in a bank and get a lot of money, and or like he's still very powered with this amount of ability that he has. He can go get the tools he needs by jumping into the future or things like that. And so I was just like, oh, I would have rathered a little bit more limits on it just to build that up. But it's still nice to see the TARDIS having a limit on it. But still, it would have been nicer to even see more, because I don't know. I think like setting a limit on the character is like part of what made this pitch of this series a bit interesting, and not to say it's not there. I mean, clearly the TARDIS is not at full function, but it would have been nicer to see it limited a little bit more further in. But I see your point too. Is like, if that goes for too long, it becomes a little bit like, all right, it's just Doctor being, a landlord, and that's a little less interesting.
Yeah, and he was it, and while I did quite like in the first one seeing how being stranded had affected the Doctor, because it may, he's usually, the Eighth Doctor is usually quite a spring in his step, kind of jolly kind of person in most of his appearances, and it kind of just being stuck there in the first box set had made him quite grumpy and a bit hermit-like, and just he sort of squirreled
Peter
his
Capaldi over Paul McGann.
Yeah, exactly. Which was interesting to see Paul McGann do something a bit different, and interesting to see how that affected his character. But I did quite like also seeing him get a bit excited again. Now he can travel again a little bit.
Yeah. No, I can hear the point too. I can see the merits of both of them. I guess moving on, the other big thing of this episode that I really enjoyed was the bits with Tanya and the Doctor, and Tanya sort of being very accepting of, they don't even like bring up her sort of being trans, which I just, in my own estimation, was a good thing. In fact, her being trans is really pretty much irrelevant for the entirety of this box set. I don't even know if it comes.
Yeah, well, there's one moment there's a little bit in the 4th story, which we'll get to,
exactly,
which kind of touches on it. But other than that, it's kind of like they'd done that story, they'd done that bit of the story in the last box set, and they'd covered it, and it's now just kind of like, yeah, okay, it's something we know about her, and yeah, other than that, it's not relevant most of the time. It's just you carry on. She's a character. It's more about her relationships with the other characters now. And like you, I really like seeing her and the Doctor, because the two of them hadn't had much interaction in the first box set, because the storyline with Liv had mostly focused on her developing relationship with Tanya had mostly focused on a developing relationship with Liv last time. So that was the kind of pairing we mostly got with her last time. So it's good to see her interacting and how she interacts with the Doctor, given also what we know about her professional life as well.
Yeah.
Because last box set, we found out that she was actually a Torchwood agent. I'm assuming that if you're watching this, you either don't care about spoilers or otherwise I've just spoiled something massively for you, in which case I'm sorry. But that was the last box set anyway.
We can go full spoilers here, I feel like.
Excellent.
It's either they're here just to enjoy our lovely faces, or they've listened to Stranded. So
yeah. So also, given the fact that she knows who he is, but he doesn't know who she is, it was an interesting dynamic. It's sort of and seeing like, he knows that she's like, he knows there's something, but he doesn't really care so much. He only cares about, how her relationship with Liv is, that Liv doesn't get hurt in this, and that his friends are protected.
Yeah.
And as long as there's any secrets that she's hiding about her job or why she's where she is don't affect that, don't hurt Liv. He's he doesn't care that much.
Yeah, it was nice to see him give that amount of trust, because the doctor usually, especially with someone who's hiding something and he's clearly aware of someone hiding something, he isn't usually quick to trust. And I felt like it was nice to sort of see him do that, to sort of be like, I trust you because other people I know trust you.
With the companions, and now I think, especially now she's actually traveled with the TARDIS multiple times by the end of this box set, she's now officially
is officially,
her and Andy as well. Andy is now also officially an Eighth Doctor companion, which is great to say as well. So we got two, the other people that live in the house that only travel once, I'm not counting them, but both Andy and her travel multiple times in the TARDIS this box set, so they both count as companions now. And the Doctor has always had a good sort of sense, like when he picks companions, he does trust them, because that's why he's allowing them to come with him. And he has a good sense of someone's character. And I think he can just tell that Tanya and Andy are both good eggs, and, he doesn't need to worry about them.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's nice to see that, though. Just sort of like characters being trusted by the Doctor, even though he knows that they're hiding things. And we spoke a little bit too. I mean, we don't need to get too far into it because we spoke about it in our initial conversation, but I think it's also still worth bringing up this sort of like the trope, because other people who may not have heard that review, the trope of like trans people being the ones that are hiding something or keeping something hidden, regardless of them being trans, sort of that trope of trans people still being an element of this character that was like not necessarily a bad thing overall, but just still like, oh, that does lean into that trope. But again, we talked about that last box set, but I at least want to bring it up since this is on my channel and a different channel. So
and that is, I suppose, a little bit unfortunate. It's just it's one of those things. I think that the decision to do that was mainly based that I don't know what the creative process of this is, but I can absolutely imagine that they came up with this character as, the Torchwood thing came first. I suspect that somebody was there and as a Torchwood agent came first, and then they cast the character and evolved some more storylines around that. So it's
I'm sorry.
No, I was gonna say, it's a bit unfortunate. It does. I do like the Torchwood stuff though. So it's kind of like one of those things where like I like it, but I do get that it's going into a trope that I know is sometimes quite harmful. So it's a tough one.
It's by no means the most egregious of that I've heard. It's one of those things where we talk about tropes. It's always easy to get into the thing like, oh, trope bad instantaneously, and it's not necessarily that. It's just like, yes, you can argue it within the context of this, it works. It's just that it gets overused. But it is interesting to sort of be like, well, you can justify it sometimes, but again, it's just sort of like thing can be problematic but also still be good at the same time, and we can sort of forgive or forget or not forgive based on each circumstance, and it's up to each individual person. I think it's too easy to say thing bad because of this instance. And honestly, you bring up a good point that I we rarely talk about, but with stories like this, it's sort of like when in the timeline of things do people get cast in representation. I mean, we're talking trans representation here, but like in a lot of different representations, there's sort of things of like, oh, did they come up with a character idea, cast somebody, and then it's like, oh, this person is part of this minority group. That would be an interesting thing to explore with this character. And I would even say like Rebecca Root is a fairly well-known actress in the UK, and so it's sort of like I could see them being like, oh, we got Rebecca Root, oh, she's trans, that might be a cool thing to add to this character, instead of it being sort of part of the character from conception. It's sort of an interesting discussion of those sort of elements of stuff that we can't really know the answer to, but it's sort of interesting to think about.
Yeah. Definitely. So her and the Doctor were probably the most interesting pairings, but there's like everybody sort of paired off. And
is there anyone else that you found interesting?
Well, I not so much. There's not so much to talk about, but I just quite like the dynamic between Liv and Andy. There's this kind of, she distrusts him, like because he is a fellow Torchwood agent. Not that she knows this yet, but like a Torchwood agent as well. She hasn't been told the truth about what Tanya does yet. And she knows there's something that's happening, that Andy and Tanya are connected. She makes it clear that she doesn't think it's I'm not sure if it's in this episode or another one, but she makes it clear, I think, to Tanya at one point, she knows it's not like a romantic thing. She's not jealous in that sense, but she knows that they have some kind of connection which she doesn't share, that Andy knows stuff about Tanya that she doesn't, and that as Tanya's partner sort of she doesn't like. And so just seeing them interact, and that kind of slight adversarial thing from Liv's perspective. And then there's Andy, who's the kind of slightly bumbling idiot who knows he can't say anything to make it better because that would give away, the Torchwood secret, but also wants to make it better. And just seeing him sort of fumble over his words and try and make it better while not being able to say anything. It's just quite a nice little amusing dynamic.
I pretty much agree. I don't really have much to add to that. And it does make me want to like go and listen to the Torchwood audios where he's officially part of Torchwood. Because I know those exist, and it's just kind of an interesting idea to me. Like I loved Andy in Torchwood, the show, but it's just like, oh, I don't see how you could be a good agent. I mean, he pulls it off pretty well here, but it's just sort of like you're so lovable and kind. I just don't see you being like a secret agent kind of guy.
Yeah, I haven't listened to all of the Torchwood ones. I've listened to very few of them, really, but I have listened to a couple of the Andy ones, and they involve a character, a bit of time travel, and interacting with a Torchwood agent from the 1920s. And their dynamic is really great as well. And so, yeah, he works quite well in the kind of like, he's not like the super secret spy, secret agent. He's Torchwood's always had like you got Ianto and Tosh, who are very much not like, they were not great under like fire, basically. But so he's kind of along that sort of lines. He's not so much a field agent.
Yeah, exactly.
But he gets wrapped up in stuff.
Okay. Well, considering all the stuff going on with John Barrowman now, it's like if they do ever bring a Torture TV show back, I would be fine with Andy being being a main cast member.
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
All right. Well, is there anything else in this one that we want to talk about? I think the only thing worth mentioning is the whole kind of mystery that's going on, but it's still just like set up for future stuff with like Robin getting scanned, the kid Robin getting scanned and finding out about this Deus Ex stuff and things like that.
Yeah, because he gets scanned and they find this base. They're on an abandoned Earth. They find this base which is run by an AI that is waiting to repopulate, or it's going to like cleanse the Earth before re-establishing humans on it or something like that. And the boy Robin gets like presses something he shouldn't, goes in, gets scanned, and the computer knows who he is because apparently he's at some point important enough to be on their database. And then we sort of lose track of him for a bit, and then he pops up again later. We don't really know what's happened in between.
Yeah, and then at the end of the episode, then they get back. They sort of like he and his mother sort of are like, all right, well, we're moving out and going somewhere else. So,
and then they move to Scotland. Yeah,
exactly. So it's like, all right, well, I guess I'm sure that's not setting stuff up for later.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I think that was mostly it. It was kind of that they're setting up, and then they're continuing this premise of something's gone wrong in the future. And that's what they're trying to investigate. There's a paradox that's happened, and something's wrong, and they haven't worked out what it is yet.
Yeah. So it's like you said, it's just mostly all set up stuff. So, all right, I think we can move on to, and then they all get back and everyone's happy, as we said. And then we can move on to the second episode, which was actually my personal favorite of the box set.
Mine too.
Unit Dating by Roy Gill. So the basic setup of this one is that Andy and the Doctor get sent back in time to the 1970s, and they run into Unit and the Brigadier, as well as two of the gay couple that was living in the flat that they're staying in, the apartment building that they're staying in, but as a young soldiers working for Unit, and sort of seeing the beginning of their relationship. But as the Doctor and Andy sort of mess with time in that era, the present day versions of them are starting to remember time changing. And so we're getting the story sort of being told in the past with the Doctor and Andy, and then in the present with them remembering what used to happen. And as time's changing, they may possibly have died in the past, which then creates another paradox of them not existing in the future. And overall, I think this was like just a really fun kind of timey-wimey episode. It tied in the Brigadier, tied in the history of UNIT, was sort of a good sort of, LGBTQ romance that we got to see play out as, starting to come together in a time when, being gay was outlawed in the UK, and sort of seeing that they become this like really happy, loving and caring couple in the present day as well. It was just all of this it was just like a fun kind of story wrapped up in a nice, like cute romance that I had a lot of fun with, and a nice Brigadier appearance who I have not actually seen, since I'm not a huge Classic Who fan, but I know of him. So this might have been the first story where I like got a full story with the Brigadier, actually, to be fair.
Because he's been referenced in New Who.
Quite a bit, yeah.
So, I mean, I suppose technically, if you've seen Death in Heaven with the 12th Doctor story with Missy, then you've seen a Brig. He just happened to be a Cyberman.
Exactly. It's like, it's close enough, right? Yeah.
I loved having the Brig back. And I think it's John Coleshaw, isn't it, that does the voice of him here? Because obviously
you would know more than I would, because like I said,
I've got the cast list here. John Coleshaw, who is a quite famous impressionist here in the UK as well. He used to have his like own TV shows where he'd do lots of impressions. He does a fantastic job of sounding so much like Nicholas Courtney, who is the original actor for the role, that, I genuinely, if I'd heard this and not known that it wasn't recorded after Nicholas Courtney's death, that I would not have known that it wasn't him. It was such a good impression. So that was really good. And it was lovely to see, to hear the Brig again. So yeah, nice. And it's another Doctor that the Brig has encountered now, I suppose.
Yeah, and it was interesting because again, I have me not being a huge Classic Who fan and not knowing it, but still knowing like the basics, as we mentioned before, like the third Doctor being stuck on Earth. You get some references to that, and like the Brig sort of being like, wait, is this out of time? Like, where how are we meeting? What's going on here? I guess I'll trust you here. And just sort of him like instantly kind of trusting Paul McGann's Doctor, and yet making reference to that sort of era of the Doctor, which was kind of fun to sort of see within all of this.
Yeah, it's sort of a similar thing, because you kind of instantly trust the Doctor as soon as the Doctor says who he is. And I suppose it's, for all he know, he could just be somebody impersonating the Doctor. He knows the Doctor can change his face, but there's, again, like there is with the Doctor kind of just having a feel for his companions, the Brig here is sort of just, I think, just has a sense, this is the Doctor, and just kind of knows. Mm-hmm. And that's quite nice. They share a bond.
Yeah. It's and also something I actually found before we came on here, something interesting within this episode's called Unit Dating. And apparently that's a reference to a continuity problem, where apparently they reference that Unit was created in like 1976. I don't know the exact, it's like 1976. You might know more than I.
Yeah, so basically when Unit was created in the show, when it first came about, it was the 60s. Like in real life, it was the 60s. Mm-hmm. And then the main Unit stories sort of are the John Pertwee era, which were aired in the early 70s. But those some of those early stories established that, or the scripts did, and the behind the scenes stuff establishes that it's meant to be set in the near future. So the general gist was that it would be the 1980s, even though it was airing in the 1970s. The problem is that not all the writers really bothered keeping that up. So that's massively inconsistent from story to story. So throughout the John Pertwee era, some of the stuff on screen will indicate that it takes place in the 1980s. Some of it indicates it takes place in the 1970s, and it's a whole big mess of hilarious continuity. And then, like in more recent years, especially Big Finish, have and some of the novels and things have done their own little like throwaway line explanation of this about time being compressed during that era and stuff. And like even in the modern series, the 10th Doctor, when he deals with Unit, just as a little gag, says something along the lines of like, oh yeah, I used to work for them in the 70s, or was it the 80s? So it's just like they're referencing their own continuity mistakes there, and So yeah, and that's generally referred to as the unit dating issue. So it's a nice play on words here because unit dating refers to that, but also obviously 2 unit personnel dating here.
Exactly. And the couple, I'm blanking on their names because it's been a hot minute since
Hold
I
on,
listened
let me
to
look at
them.
the
It's,
let me look at my booklet. So it's Tony and Ron.
Yeah, Tony and Ron. So Tony and Ron, I have to say, were really kind of adorable in these moments. Like you get the sense, I think this story does a really good job of showing them in the past where they're clearly kind of feeling something for each other, and they're sort of like hinting at each other like maybe we should go like do some things, but also the sense of like the guarded nature of it, that they kind of have to be kind of protective of each other and can't really state intentions to each other, and so they might misread things because of the era in which this takes place. In the UK, it was illegal to be gay at the time because legislating actual people that exists is great.
And I imagine even in the military that would have been probably even worse.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so it straddled this line of doing such a very good job, in my opinion, of being like cute and adorable, and yet recognizing the era in which it was set and how difficult that could be. And there's even in a sort of bit at the end of the episode where I believe it's, what was it, Helen, I believe, has like sort of a bit, or was it Liv, or might have been another character altogether now that I think about it. There's one of the characters sort of like remembers. There's a bit at the end where another character.
Oh yes, it's Helen, because she's the one that's from the past. So she's from the 1940s, I think, originally. Mm-hmm. That's her origin time. So she was remembering about her brother, I think it was.
Yeah, who was hinted to be bi or pansexual.
Yeah, and was basically ostracized from the family because of that, and their parents disowned him, and they, that obviously affected Helen, and she was devastated that her parents had, cut him off and things. And I can't remember what the end result of that story was, but I don't think it ended happily.
No, it didn't end happily, if I recall. But it was more. The story was more about Helen sort of referencing the fact that like how much she wished people could have been accepting of her brother, and how much her brother could have like had a really rewarding and fulfilled life had he been accepted. And I think sort of like referencing that in the context of seeing how difficult it was for Tony and Ron to find each other in this initial story, but then comparing with them just being able to live as a happy couple in the present day, and like getting to share these old stories and like joking with each other and kind of living just like a very cute, adorable, like older gay couple, and like is just like my life goal. Just like and so like they're just absolutely adorable. And so like her sort of recognizing that and sort of seeing like they got a chance to have this and my brother didn't, and yet they also were dealing with the same thing, just speaks to the complicated history of the LGBTQ community. And I found that to be like, I thought this episode was just so well done in displaying that, and I think it just did a nice job.
Yeah, I can't really add anything to that. Yeah, absolutely agree. It was a really good job. I think the Stranded, Big Finish Doctor Who has had certainly LGBTQ plus characters before. You've had, even on TV, you've had Bill and things, but I think this story is probably, and Stranded in general, actually, I think they're making a really great effort with this box set series in particular to focus on that and give that representation, possibly better than it's been done in Doctor Who anywhere else, I think, which is really nice.
It is sad that sometimes the best representation, I mean, it's almost always the case, but usually the best representation of minority groups comes in the secondary materials instead of the show proper. Not to say I don't love Bill. Bill is great, but I feel like this episode did such a nice job of eschewing the trauma that typically comes with these stories. Like even Bill, spoiler for the actual show, like Bill's story, while it does kind of have a happy ending, does end with like her and her love interest both being dead and living as weird water space monsters. And so there's still some trauma associated with that romance. Whereas this story manages to have trauma as a background element, but it's really focused on their love together. But it's still not ignoring that trauma. And I really appreciate stories that are able to like talk about the trauma, talk about the pain and hardships that LGBTQ people face, but not have that be the focus or the end resolution of the story. And I think that again, it's a very deft hand that is in an understanding hand to be able to write something like that, and the episode does it well. So
Yeah. Yeah. One moment I really did like in this is it's the Doctor and Andy that go back to the unit era, whether that be the 70s or 80s or whenever it is.
the 90s,
And
it's
definitely not the 90s. We know that. It's the 70s or the 80s. But it's those two that go back. And Andy, again, is kind of the comic relief character of this series. He's the one that kind of accidentally gets into trouble by saying the wrong thing. And he's given to get into the unit base. The Doctor has some of his old unit passes in his TARDIS, presumably. His Dr. John Smith, as he went by, as his sort of tends to go by as his human name, and one for Joe Grant. Joe Grant was his companion back in the 70s when the Third Doctor was, and Joe Grant is female. Andy is not female. But Joe is one of those names that can be, it's one of those androgynous names that is used all the time for both sexes, all genders and everything. So initially, Andy just assumes Joe was a guy.
I remember this. Yeah.
There's this whole sort of mistaken identity plot where, because I think I can't remember which way around, whether it's Ron or I can't remember which one's the soldier and which one's the scientist.
I believe Ron is the scientist, Tony's the soldier, I believe.
Okay, so Tony as the soldier knows who Joe Grant is, but because he's new, Ron the scientist doesn't know who she is. And so when Andy comes in wearing the badge, he thinks that stands for Joseph Grant, and it sort of there ends up being this mistaken identity. Tony gets jealous of the fact that he thinks like there's this whole thing about what is it? There's a line about you're like the scientist one. Again, I'm getting confused with the names. He says to Andy, "Oh yeah, we've got something in common, men," and like that are kind of like slightly because he thinks that why is it? There's been a line about Tony has said something about it has an eye for the soldiers or something. Joe has an eye for the soldiers. That's it.
Yeah.
And yeah, anyway, I'm babbling now and getting very confused about what my own point is.
I'm kind of enjoying just seeing you trying to wait out.
Trying to remember it or and get it straight in my head as I say it.
See, but anyway. That's where you're going wrong. Just don't get things straight on this channel. We don't do anything straight here. It's fine. Yeah.
Good point. Yeah. So yeah, there was just this great bit of sort of mistaken identity. Him thinking that Andy is Joe Grant and Joe was a guy, and that Joe likes the soldiers, and there's just this hilarious little interaction, and Andy's just like, "Oh, what do I say now?" Panicking, and it's just this great scene.
Yeah. No, it was just a lot of fun. I think I recall that. Sorry, just to give listeners a sort of just a notice. Like I listened to this. We were supposed to record this 2 weeks ago, so I listened to this 2 weeks ago. So some of the small details I forgot here and there, but I do remember that.
Yeah. Whereas I listened to this yesterday, I just have a terrible memory, and already.
See, you have no excuse. I'm trying to remember if there's anything else in this episode that I really wanted to draw attention to. I think I kind of mentioned everything that I wanted to at least bring up. Do you have anything you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, no, just that it was a really lovely, sweet sort of love story. I love the timey-wimey nature of it. I don't think we've actually mentioned that the Doctor and Andy get stuck in basically a Groundhog Day style time loop. Mm-hmm. So the same sort of 10, 15 minutes keep repeating over and over again. And they can be hit and miss, those type of stories. But when they get them right, I love a Groundhog Day style story.
They're some of my favorites. And it's even more to make it clear too, it's even more fun. It's even harder to do those stories and thread the needle of it in audio format because it can become very confusing very quickly. It almost does, as is clear.
It was really
was
interesting re-listening to it because at this very moment I'm trying to finish writing a time loop story for audio. So I picked up a few notes of how to do it while I was listening as well. So yeah, it was really good. And I love those type of stories. I think the best type I think possibly the best one I've ever seen is the SG-1 Stargate SG-1 one, which is one of my favorite time loop stories ever. And actually the Star Trek Discovery one is pretty good too.
I like that one.
Harry Mudd.
I like that one pretty solidly, mostly just for the different ways that Lorca gets killed in that episode. That one's a good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think my personal favorite was actually recently Palm Beach. Palm Springs.
Oh, I haven't seen that yet, but I've been meaning to watch it.
It is actually it is excellent and does some very clever things with the time loop format that I hadn't seen done before, that I don't want to spoil, because it's much more interesting to just watch it without having any sort of recognition of it. But they do some new things with that time loop format that I really thought was cool. And then also Russian Doll is another one that does a couple cool different things with it as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'd recommend both of those to you if you're looking for good inspiration.
I'll check them both out. Yeah. But that's all I had really for this one. Great story, but my favorite one of the box set, I think.
Yeah. All right. Well, that I agree with you. It's my favorite one as well. But then let's move on to the next one, which is my personal least favorite one. I think it is more ambitious than the first one, but for me, this one was my least favorite, and that's Baker Street Irregulars by Lisa Mcmullen. Apologies if I say her name wrong. But in this one, the doctor basically takes, I believe their names is Zakia and Aisha. I'm probably saying the names wrong, and I apologize. But they basically go back to World War II to meet their grandparents, who were part of the Baker Street Irregulars, two women working in sort of like as spies for during World War II. And so this episode, and also Tanya and Liv sort of work out their emotional sort of relationship stuff while also defusing a bomb, which was fun. So all of that is sort of happening all at the same time here. And for me, just to sort of give my overview on this one, I feel like this episode was trying to do a lot of different things. It was trying to show like, hey, let's show like women being and sort of women of color as well being awesome in World War II. Let's also show there's like a whole bit where like I think it's Aisha's I totally mispronounced her name, but her mother gets captured and then is being tortured by a Nazi who is basically like, I don't want to do this. So it's like a kind of a thing about not all Nazis were bad Nazis. And so there's like that story going on at the same time. Then there's also the bomb defusal. It's just I think my problem with this episode is just there's a lot happening, and it didn't feel like it had a clear through line and didn't really fully do justice to all of the different storylines that were going on here. So that's my overview.
I can see that. It didn't bother me as much, but I definitely, now you've said it, I definitely get what you mean. There's a lot of like, they have tried to cram a lot in there, a lot of different story elements, and maybe some of them don't get as much time as they maybe needed to. But I really do like some elements of it. I really do like it was good to see the stuff between Liv and Tanya, because and the sort of checking in what the state of their relationship was
part of it. So
yeah, because they're having a bit of a tiff, which initially starts out at the beginning of the episode, sort of being sparked by whether or not they should get a cat. So
I mean, that's how you know you're in far for the relationship once you get the cat.
Yeah. So we start to get, but basically it boils down to, they've got this arrangement where Liv knows, she doesn't know about the Torchwood stuff, but she knows, and Tanya has told her that there is stuff she can't tell her. And they've come to this agreement that like they've both got secrets, and they are, not going to ask about each other's secrets. But quite at the beginning of this episode, it's established that Liv, and throughout this episode, that Liv isn't happy with that arrangement, even though it was her suggestion. She's finding it difficult to cope with that.
Mm.
Yeah.
And go ahead. No, I really, really like that. And I like Tanya kind of makes a good point of just like, well, this was your idea. And also like, you really start the question you're asking is like, do you trust me? And it's not like whether or not you have frustration with the secrets that I have. It's more, do you trust me with it? And that's sort of the thing that they're hitting in this moment. I think that was sort of like a really astute observation and a nice conversation that they were able to thread with these two characters.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was a really nice bit. And it does come out well in the end because they sort of resolve their differences by the end, and they're back to sort of being happy couple again. So that's nice. And the other bit that I really liked was the sort of revelation between the two sort of guest characters, where, because with these two from the first box, we're in the first box set as well, and they're in this box set. They're part of a family that live in the house with one of the flats in the house, and they are sisters. But throughout the story, we see the older sister be very constantly really overprotective of her younger sister, not wanting her to go off on stuff, and getting really worried about her, which would be understandable. You, as an oldest sibling myself, I've got a younger sister who is 10 years younger than me, so that's same here, I understand that. But you get a feeling that something else is going on, and then you get the revelation once the younger one has gone off to a dangerous mission and come back safely, and they've kind of re-embraced that actually it was her, the older sister is actually her mum. And there was that scene when she told her, generally actually had goosebumps. It was really a touching, emotional scene, and I thought it was really well acted, really well done, and just a really lovely scene overall.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I thought it was a really heartwarming scene, and it's one of those things that's kind of sad to sort of handle. It's age and parenthood, and sort of when you feel like you're able to be a parent, and when you have to be able to you sort of handle those things. I think it was nice.
Yeah, and I like the sort of background they gave it. Obviously, I think they're sort of I'm not exactly sure, a Pakistani family, I believe.
I believe so, yeah.
So there's obviously cultural reasons why at the time that the family felt that they had to pretend that it was that the older sister's mum's child instead of her child. And but what I did like is the fact that they made a point of saying that she always felt very supported by her mum in this. It wasn't chastising. It didn't feel like her mum had chastised her and said, "Oh, you've brought shame to the family," or anything like that. They just it was a practical thing. You need to do it, but I think they made a point of saying that the mum was always there for her and supported her. And I thought that was a really nice, touching moment as well. The fact that they included that. Yeah. Some of the stuff that didn't work so well, though, I don't know about you. Like you mentioned, when the grandmother, who is the World War II spy, has been captured, and the interrogation scenes between her and the German soldier, I thought that was a little bit weird as well. Partly because they seem to go in two really weirdly different directions between two different scenes. Because in one scene, it kind of felt a little bit like, and it was really cringy. It felt a little bit like they were implying that he was going to rape her.
Yeah.
And then suddenly in the next scene, we're meant to be feeling sympathy for him, and that he doesn't really want to do it. He doesn't really want to interrogate her. And he had a Jewish girlfriend who, obviously the current German situation at that time meant that he had to split up with, and who knows what's happened to her. And then we were meant to be, so it's just this really weird juxtaposition of these two scenes.
That was the bit that I wanted to get into, and it was probably the thing that made me most dislike this episode. I feel like this is kind of what I was getting at when I was saying I feel like I was trying to juggle too much, because that whole scenes with him is the discussion that those scenes are kind of having with this Nazi who is a complicated human. I get German soldier. I guess he wasn't necessarily part of the Nazi party, but German soldier who is we tend to, and I understand the point that it's trying to make of German soldiers were not all Nazis. They were not all the worst people in the world. And yet they were still taking part of the system that was doing terrible things. And that is a very worthwhile conversation to have. But that's honestly needs to be the focus of an entire episode, not something that's like within all this other stuff going on. And it felt like it was just not given enough focus for this concept to come through. And so it did have that very tonal and weird whiplash to have it go from like implied like rape to then being like, let's have sympathy for him and let's sort of like give this long backstory about him having the Jewish girlfriend. And it's like, I get that this could work. I feel like it being a good focus of an episode, but since it's not, it just feels like too quick and too, I don't want to say surface level, but just trying to cram in too many different ideas into a couple scenes that makes them come across as kind of icky overall.
Yeah. It had some interesting ideas. It was just, I don't think it was particularly well done, and I think it undermined itself with that earlier scene with the implied rape. That just
it should have just been like either he was gross and icky from the start and just stayed that way, or they kind of try to complicate him from the start. If they were only going to have like 2 scenes with him, it should have just been, it should have been pick one or the other, not try to, I get, again, it's one of those, like, if you want to have a gradation of like, look, he's a complicated person and he can do terrible things while also doing good things, that need to be the focus of the episode. If that's not the focus of the episode, then pick one of those lanes and kind of stay with it. And it didn't really do that. And so I think it kind of lost me in it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. There really wasn't anything super else for this one on me. Like I said, this is my least favorite of them. So
no, it's I wouldn't, because I think it's got more stuff in it that it's weird because it's got some really good stuff in it, which I really love, like the 2 things I mentioned, the scenes between Liv and Tanya, and then the mother-daughter stuff. But it's also got the worst stuff in the series. So it's kind of got this weird thing. Whereas episode 1, which I generally have thought of as my least favorite, it's just because there's nothing that... Bland. Yeah, it's more bland. Whereas this stuff, because it has some good stuff in it that I really like, I think I put it just above that, even though it's also got some stuff that I like less than that other episode, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I have the same opinion of it as you. I just think I just like switch the orders of which ones I like more, but I think our opinions are pretty much aligned on it. So yeah. Cool. Well, that brings us to the final story in the box set, The Long Way Round by John Dorney. And how to describe this one. This one was a lot of fun. So basically the Doctor, Liv and Helen, I believe, and Tanya as well, all get captured in the future. They basically go to the future of Earth and they get captured and they're sort of locked away. And they're being interrogated by this woman who dogmatically believes that the Doctor is evil and has set up this dystopian society that they're all now living in. And so all of this is just like these interviews that she is having with the Doctor and all the companions, trying to convince them that the Doctor is actually evil, and also like asking, like implying that time is being rewritten at the same time, because she keeps asking them like, what's your name, these certain facts about them, and said, oh, I know stuff about myself. She's like, well, would you know these things about yourself? And sort of implying that time is being rewritten at the same time. So all of that is going on. And we sort of get this idea of this dystopian society that Earth has now become, with this dystopic government. And then at the same time, in the present day, we have the curator, played by Tom Baker, the previously known as the Fourth Doctor, but Tom Baker is implied to be, or the curator is implied to be, a future iteration of the Doctor that we saw back in the 50th anniversary and as well in Stranded #1. He seems to be aware that something's off with time and something is going on, and so starts to investigate into the Doctor, the 8th Doctor, and what's going on with the TARDIS with this little girl who, spoilers, just final spoilers for the story, turns out to be the girl, the younger version of the person interrogating them in the future. And so that is the sort of basics of a very complicated, very timey-wimey story. And there's a couple other revelations in there that I thought were cool that I'm sure we'll touch on in just a second. So, and apologies, my neighbors are outside yelling, so apologies if you and the audience can hear my neighbors outside yelling outside my door right now.
I haven't heard anything, but
yeah, I was trying to not get distracted as I'm like trying to describe a story, like a complicated story, while also like they just stopped again. But I was like trying to describe a complicated story while also being like, what's happening outside my window? Anyways.
Yeah, I like this one. I really like the format of this one. It's got that kind of every scene is a two-hander between the interrogator and one of the TARDIS crew. And you get these scenes in it. I like the order that they did them in, because they start with Andy, who again has his slightly bumbling shtick going on, which works quite well for it. It's like that initial, like, well, we're meant to be still confused about what's going on, because we're just thrown into this. We don't get the setup of them being captured. We're just thrown straight into Andy being interviewed. And so we haven't got a clue what's going on. We haven't got a clue where we are. And we kind of find out information along with Andy about what year they're in, and various other things. So I quite like that. And I just thought it was a very well-paced episode. The revelations came at sort of just the right points, like where we found out sort of who, like finding out that woman was that girl that the curator has been talking to, came about the midway point, which kind of felt about right. And yeah,
it's a bit obvious that that's where that's going. So I'm glad that they didn't string it out too far.
Yeah, exactly. It was kind of like they'd had one or two scenes with the child, and then they brought this up, and just to make sure people had got it, because the first time it's revealed, it's a bit more hinted at, like that the surname, the girl says her surname, I think, after
it's a subtle
the
reference.
woman had, it's a more subtle one, and then later on it's more hammered home in the next scene. So yeah, I thought it was a good one, and I kind of liked it. And then of course the Doctor is the last one to be interviewed in terms of this chronology of the interviews. So yeah, I really liked it.
I really like seeing like Helen and Liv both standing up for the Doctor, and really be like them given chances of saying like, oh, the Doctor, do you really know the Doctor? He can change his face. Like this Doctor that maybe is going around that created this sort of hellish future. There's this figure who like wears a mask who is killing people, and implied to be the Doctor's like, well, he changes his features, he changes his personality. Do you really trust him that much? And there's even like shades of something like the War Doctor coming up in there, and the idea of that sort of thing of like being a much more violent Doctor, and not a overt reference, but you sort of get that idea of like a darker version of the Doctor.
And people that have seen the classic series will also know that there's a supposed future incarnation of the Doctor referred to as the Veil Yard, from Trial of the Time Lord, which is said to be a future incarnation which is brought back to try to act as the prosecution against the Sixth Doctor, and he's basically it's referred to as an amalgamation of all the darker sides of the Doctor. So I like the fact that there is always this like background doubt, because we've had it set up in the first box that certainly at least one other race blames the Doctor for the destruction and thinks he's going to be some kind of despot. Then we've got these scenes in this one, with this woman accusing the Doctor of effectively being a fascist dictator. And there is always this little bit of a doubt in the back. You think, okay, the Eighth Doctor wouldn't do that, but could it be a future Doctor? It could be. It's possible. We've certainly had precedent for that in the Veil Yard. So up until the very end, I think even it does keep you guessing about whether or not this could be the Doctor.
Yeah, exactly. But I like that Helen and Liv both sort of reaffirmed that, like, no, we trust him. He wouldn't go this far, because he would stay core to who he is. And so, and I like that they give a little bit of doubt, but they ultimately reaffirm their trust, which is kind of talking it out with you. It's kind of like a running theme throughout this whole box set, is like trusting people without having all the information, but just trusting character.
Yeah, definitely. Really one bit I liked about the Andy bit was a line that sort of touched, because obviously they're living in this sort of basically fascist state, and it's only 2050, so it's not that far in the future. And Andy has a line saying London can't have gone full fascist, not in 30 years. And then the reply to that, it doesn't, the interview says it doesn't take a year, not in the right circumstances. And I think especially around, the last 5 years or so of world events and things, that seems so much more chilling now than it might have done 10 years ago.
No,
Because it doesn't take very long for systems to start to fall to that sort of thing, given the right circumstances.
Yeah, no, it's very, very sadly very true. Sadly very true. Yeah. I always like it when my Doctor Who gets didactically political. It's always good. It's like, but Doctor Who's not political. It's like, okay. Remember the time the Doctor was spewing out Karl Marx in like whatever the 70s or 80s? I remember that scene, whatever.
Yeah. I'm sure half these people that say Doctor Who shouldn't be political have never watched the Pertwee years, and if they have, they've clearly forgotten it, because that was very political back in the John Pertwee Third Doctor era.
Yeah, very well. Yeah, I always wonder when people who say that stuff have they actually ever watched a show, whether about Doctor Who or Star Trek. It's more my field than that. But it's like, it's like, what have you been watching? Anyways, but yeah, there's two other revelations that happen in this story that I really quite liked, and I really quite liked how they came about. And I kept not expecting this to surprise me. One was sort of like felt like, okay, that's a good twist, which was the fact that a lot of what this interrogator was basing her sort of process on, believing that this was the Doctor who created this society, was a letter that she got that sort of said, like, don't trust him, he's the evil, the Doctor's the one that did it. But then at some point the Doctor says, okay, if that's what you really believe, give me a piece of paper. And he writes something down, and it's literally, without having seen the original letter, and it's literally the exact same letter that she had. And he's like, well, I probably just wrote it right now to prove to you that I'm not the one who did this, and then I'm going to send this back to you at some point to make you believe it. So it sort of became this sort of like recurring loop that he created. He's like, yeah, this paper is probably the same paper as that, so don't get them too close to each other.
Yeah, nice. I really like that.
Yeah, it was a good little twist. It wasn't something that like broke my brain, because we've seen that sort of like loop thing before, but it was a cool little like, oh, okay, that's how that works. But then actually there's two more twists now that I even think about it. So there's another twist that we get, which is the revelation this whole time you think that this interrogator is actually for the government, like she's part of this evil government. Turns out that she is actually one of the part of the resistance fighting the government, which is just a really, really cool subversion of that. And you're sort of like, oh crap. It's like, is that really that just was a nice reveal there.
Yeah, and that I think was the other thing I was trying to think of when I was talking about the pacing of where things come in the episode, because I think that was also about halfway through, and it just felt like, oh, this was a really good time, and this is all spaced out really well, and this is the right moment to reveal that, to completely change the dynamic of what the rest of the interviews would feel like, and keep it interesting, because it could have gotten stale doing this, having the same bits over and over again in the interviews effectively, but that kind of injected a bit of oomph back into it, which I quite liked.
And then there's the final revelation, which is that the person who is wearing the mask that was implied to be possibly the Doctor turns out is Robin, the kid who got scanned in the first story way back. So that's sort of paying off that little piece of storytelling,
who doesn't seem to have aged, so that's a mystery that we've got to come. And he does say he got here like you the long way round, so it implies that he has lived through all that time, but perhaps that something that happened to him on that planet in the first episode did something to him, which is prolonging his life somehow, maybe has affected his brain and is making, influenced him to do this, whatever he's doing.
Or it's just Scotland, like I said.
Yeah. Could be Scottish. Yeah. No offense to any Scottish listeners.
I'm kidding, of course, obviously. Look, I'm American. I don't know the inner machinations of the UK politics, so if I just said something terribly offensive, I'm sorry. But yeah, so yeah, I thought that was a good little twist and a nice little payoff to that story beat, which I feel like is good to have gotten that here, because I feel like if that had sort of waited to the next box set, just knowing how much time happens between these box sets, I probably would have forgotten.
Although I think the next one is out in a couple of months' time.
Yeah, well, still a few months.
Not too long to wait now.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it was a good reveal and like a good little setup for like, okay, I see that this has like some bigger mystery going through it. So yeah, I rather liked that twist. So this one was a little less emotional. but much more sort of like trippy, sort of twisty, turny. And I feel like the revelations kept coming, and they all sort of kept me on my toes the entire time in a good way.
Yeah. Yeah, same. There were a couple of other bits I was going to mention. The first bit was the curator talking to the child. I don't know if you got this. Like, there were some moments it just felt a little creepy.
Yeah.
Like he's talking about offering, like he's offering her a sweet. He's this old man offering this 12-year-old a sweet on a park bench without her parents around. Just, it felt a little creepy. And then at some point he talks about, because he's talking about magic, he's talking about sawing women in half, but obviously in reference to a magic show. But just the whole context of it just made me felt like, and you know, it's Tom Baker. He's obviously very sweet in his delivery, but it just felt like that feels a little bit creepy.
Yeah. I feel what's interesting about it in that context, like I could kind of get the Santa Claus-y nature, like the curator, like I'm gonna be he's like a museum person. So that element like kind of worked for me in a less creepy way, but there's also this weird implication of like, we have associations with him being the fourth Doctor and being like, oh, this is the Tom Baker fourth Doctor, but it's also sort of like as the curator, he's technically a different character who we don't really fully know he very much has a very mysterious sort of air to him. So you're sort of like, okay, is he fully trustworthy? Which then can lead into that creepiness that you were getting there. That I think, yeah. I can get that. I kind of liked it instead of like a Santa Claus. Why did I say Santa Claus? Why did I say that?
Santa Claus.
Santa Claus sort of way, where he's just sort of like inspiring this little child, and sort of like getting her interested in, you know, time travel and stuff, which has a darker shift to it considering where we know she ends up later on.
And what he says to her, sorry, carry on. I've interrupted your point. I was gonna say what he said about the magician stuff has a point, because from his perspective, all of the stuff that we're seeing in the interrogation room has already happened, because he's a future incarnation of the Doctor, so he knows what's going to happen. And the woman, the older version of that girl, remembers him saying sometimes I can't remember, was it sometimes the magic is real, sometimes it really is just sometimes it really is just an illusion. And that helps her realize that the Doctor is probably telling the truth. So there was a nice sort of link, and it felt like that justified the reason for those scenes between the curator and the girl.
Yeah, and I feel like the other reason too is just to remind us that he's somehow involved in this, because he was very much involved in the first box set, but less so in this one. So it's probably another reason to be like, yeah, Tom Baker's here, and involved. I'm sure he'll have a bigger role to play in Stranded 3 and or 4. So yeah. The other bit I was going to mention was when, because I was keen to get your opinion on it, when we mentioned earlier that the fact that Tanya is transgender doesn't really get referenced much in this box set. It did in the last one, in one story in particular, because it was when there was a sort of coming out story to Liv, which was I think we both agreed was handled very exceptionally well in that one. Here, the only time it gets touched on is in these interviews where the interviewer, the woman that was the child, she sort of almost dead names her. And I was just curious about what your take. How do you think that was handled well? I think so too. I think it's interesting in the sense that, like, I don't know if it was necessary, but I also get the idea, like, the reason that she's almost dead named is because she's like looking at records and like looking at information of her. And that is, especially from what I know in the UK, but in the United States as well, that can be a recurring problem with like trans people not being able to update their forms and not being able to update their legal names and legal, documentation. And here in the United States, in some states, that's really difficult. Even in states that allow it, it can be a pain in the butt. And I know in the UK, it's even harder for trans people as well to update their legal names. And so I thought that was a nice reference to that actual like real issue that is kind of very difficult for trans people. And especially given the politicization of trans people in the UK right now, I think it's nice to sort of see that be put in this platform. So I actually thought it was well handled, and
because at this point in the story as well, we're meant to this is the point of the story where we don't know that she's against the fascist government yet. We still think she's part of the fascist government. So I think possibly from a writing point of view of them wanting to make us think she's a bad guy, that kind of plays into that as well, because she's doing stuff that, like, okay, that's a bit dodgy, that she's not being very nice here. So maybe they put it in for that reason as well, to try and convince us that she's a bad guy at that point in the story, before then turning the tables on it later on, and we find out that actually she's fighting against the fascists.
Yeah. And the other good important thing too is that, she's not actually, her dead name isn't actually used, which is nice.
Yes.
Which is also an important note. It's like, you can bring it up, but it's also try best to avoid using dead names, even for fictional characters. So it was nice that, like, the concept is brought up without actually revealing dead names, because then that can be used against, like, I'm sure, like, the transphobes are not super on the Stranded, beat of, like, going after Stranded and all this stuff. But I'm sure, like, transphobes would, if they were, like, talking about this, they would dead name the character and things like that, because that is a common technique used. So it's nice to not have given that ammunition. So
yeah.
I think it was well done. So yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And then there's also a nice little paradox to round out the episode too, with where I believe it's Liv goes up to the little girl version, the person interrogated, and said, don't do that. You said, I think when she's interrogating them, it says, you never came up and talked to me. And so then Liv goes up and talks to her and says, well, now things have changed. So we got a little bit of a paradox going on.
So we already know that the timeline is going to be different in some way, because that character will have talked to them, whereas in the previous timeline she doesn't. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know how much that will. It'll be interesting to see if this character comes back in the next box set as well.
Yeah, especially given that, like, we know that Robin is, like, a thing that is going to be sticking around probably for the next story. So it's interesting to me that we set up this, like, paradox, and also changing the future, that we know will have to have some bearing on the plot later on.
Yeah. And actually, one thing that we haven't mentioned is that when the revelation that it's Robin is made, the other revelation is that he's been watching through the cameras this whole time and has infiltrated these rebels' camera system, has been watching the whole time. So it seems like he wanted the Doctor to go back. So, like, are they just playing into his plan, or there's that mystery as well, which is quite interesting, and I'm intrigued about what's coming next.
We'll have to talk about it with Stranded number 3 at some point. So that's pretty much everything. I think overall I really like this box set a lot. I think I probably liked it. I don't know. There were stories that I liked more than the first Stranded. Like Unit Dating, I think was probably my favorite of both box sets. But I think overall, I like the first box set a little bit more. But I think Unit Dating was a particular highlight, and I think overall they both were strong box sets in my opinion. So I'm curious what your thoughts are overall.
Yeah, I agree. It is strong. It does have some weak stories. It has some good stories. I'm not sure. I haven't listened to Stranded 1 since we reviewed it, so I don't. It's hard to compare, but I'd certainly say they're at least on a level with each other. There are some good things, some bad things. I really like what they're doing with this series in general, which seems to be it's a much more character focused series generally, and they have these really great emotional stories. Usually, well, the pattern for the first 2 box, I don't know if they'll continue this or not, seems to be that the first 3 stories of the box are very character-driven ones, and then you have the sort of more action-packed, story-heavy one in the 4th one. And I think that's quite a good pattern. And if they continue that, I think that will be quite good.
Yeah, it gives you some nice little standalone stuff, but then keeps you intrigued for more.
Yeah, and it makes a nice change from the previous Big Finish 8th Doctor ones, which I think you've been listening to as well, haven't you?
I've kind of jumped. I've jumped around with them, but they're from the ones that I've listened to, like Time War and a little bit of Doom Coalition that I'm in right now, and there's also Dark Eyes, and there's another one with the 8th Doctor. That I can't
Ravenous.
Yeah.
So and they're all quite
plot focused. Yeah, sorry.
Big save the universe type things. So like throughout the whole thing, you might get the occasional quiet moment in them, but the bulk of it is big save the universe stuff with the occasional quiet moment. This has reversed it, and it's quite a nice just change of pace.
Yeah, no, I very much agree. I think there's still some universe ending stuff going on here, but it's not the focus, which is kind of nice. So it's a nice inversion. So Yeah, overall, I think it's a really good box set. So yeah, that's everything that I think I had to say, and we will definitely have you back either on your channel or on mine for Stranded number 3, as long as you want to come back.
Yeah,
didn't
let's
hate me this
alternate
time.
it. We'll
Yeah.
do 3 on mine and 4 on yours.
Sounds like a plan to me. So yeah, just before we wrap out, Philip, where can people find you? Where can people get more Phil if they want it?
You can get what is it? Phil DeFranco says you can get filled in.
Yeah. Oh God.
No, that sounds wrong. You can find me.
Oh,
you can find me on YouTube, just my name, Philip Hawkins, and as I said before, I do a lot of Doctor Who content as well as other pop culture things, Star Trek, MCU, Red Dwarf, all sorts of things. The Red Dwarf podcast is called Everybody is Dead, Dave, and that is available as well as on my YouTube channel on things like Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all the usual podcast places. So if it's not out already, keep an eye on that for an upcoming episode where Jessie is a guest reviewer on, along with me and my regular co-host Adam. And then
you also had Council of Geeks, who is another friend of the
yes,
channel too. As you've had
we've had Council of Geeks on previously as well. So yeah, it's all
we're
good.
all very incestuous, is what we're saying.
And on Twitter, you can find me. It's at IUDEX_Phil, which is pronounced Udex.
Oh,
but
awesome.
nobody would spell it right if I just said Udex. So Udex_Phil.
We do our best. Like I said, I think we were talking yesterday, I grabbed all the Jessie Genders social media handles as soon as I could.
Yeah, see, my Twitter handle goes back to when I was at uni, and I just needed an online name. It wasn't even for Twitter at the time; it was for an online game or something. And I was just like, I need something, and I just scrolled through I was being very pretentious, and I scrolled through a Learn Latin for Dummies book, and just found this word that I liked the sound of. And to make it even more pretentious, it means judge. So,
oh boy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I've just been kind of stuck with it ever since, because now I feel like,
it's better
hard
than
to change.
My Xbox Live name is Dr. Trekkie to mix Doctor Who and Star Trek, and that's just it doesn't stick around as easily.
No.
Cringy.
But at least people could spell that.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. And for me, just everyone, you're on my channel right now already, so just don't forget to subscribe if you found your way through here. But I assume if you're listening to this whole thing, you probably already are. But don't forget to if you don't. And also I have my main channel, Jessie Gender. But other than that, thank you so much for coming on, Philip. Thank you so much, audience, for
Thanks
listening.
for having me.
And we'll see you all really soon. So live long and prosper.
Can I do that? Hold on, let me see. Yeah, I can.
There we go. Yeah, you don't have to
live long and prosper.
You don't have to do the rubber bands to get it. So some people have to do the rubber bands. All right. Talk to you later, audience.